A history of alcohol.
I'm here with my mom, Wendy, and we are at Ye Olde Mitre pub, one of the oldest pubs in London, which is the perfect place to tell you about the history of alcohol.
Intoxicating beverages have been part of human culture from the beginning. Alcohol flows through our social, ritual, religious, economic, government, and medical history.
So join us with a glass of your favorite hard or non-alcoholic tipple as we explore the history of drinking.
Consuming alcohol likely predates humanity. Primates evolved the ability to metabolize alcohol by eating fermented fruit. Paleolithic hunter-gatherers in Africa probably discovered that putting fruit into water and allowing the mixture to molder for a few days made a drink which had an enjoyable intoxicating effect on the body. They may have also flooded beehives with water to make an early form of mead.
Mom, what are you drinking?
I am enjoying Charles in Charge Ale, brewed especially for King Charles III's coronation. And it is delicious.
Beer was first brewed by early hunter-gatherers using wild grains, and it might have inspired the agricultural revolution because people wanted to have more grains to make more beer. The oldest known brewery was found in a 13,000-year-old gravesite in Israel.
Traces of early beer and wine have been found in prehistoric jugs all over the world. Drinks made from grapes, hawthorn berries, honey, and rice dating to 7000 BCE were found in northern China. Barley beer from the same era has been found in the Middle East. Early evidence of grape wine production in Georgia dates to 6000 BCE, and in ancient Persia to 5000 BCE. Pulque, made from the sap of agave, has been found in Mexico dating to 2000 BCE. Drinking wasn't just done for pleasure. It has long played a role as a social lubricant and has been woven into various cultural and religious rituals. Making alcohol was also an important way to preserve crops and made up a significant portion of ancient people's diets. The nutritional benefits of fresh fruit could only be enjoyed at harvest, but drinking wine stretched those nutrients throughout the year. Alcohol has also played a pivotal role in the development of medicine. Texts from Sumeria and Egypt from 2100 BCE mention alcohol being used to cure the sick. Beer was pivotal to the development of Egyptian civilization. A brewery in the city of Hierakonpolis, dating to 3400 BCE, was capable of producing 300 gallons of beer a day. Beer was the drink of common laborers. The builders of the Great Pyramids of Giza were allotted 1 1/3 gallons a day. Jars of libations were routinely placed in the tombs of the dead to be enjoyed in the afterlife. But the wealthy had wine. Beer and wine were both sacred and offered to the gods, but the government and priests warned against drinking to excess. According to ancient Chinese legend, the first alcohol was presented as a gift to Emperor Yu the Great around 2100 BCE. This was huangju, a wine made from rice or millet, with a strong 8 to 20% alcohol content, which is still popular in China today. 400 years later, Emperor Ji had become so decadent that he ordered an entire lake filled with huangju to impress his concubine. The emperor's mandate from heaven was removed, and the Shah dynasty fell. Home brewing was a common household task at every level of Chinese society. Much of the social interaction of the gentry revolved around hosting drinking guests. During the Tang dynasty in the 600s, tea culture emerged and supplanted huangju as China's drink of choice. Intoxicating beverages were produced across ancient North and South America and were used primarily for communal and shaman rituals. The Apache made alcohol from the sap of the saguaro cactus. The Zunnis fermented aloe, corn, and prickly pear. The Creeks and Cherokee used berries and other fruits. The Iroquois fermented sap from sugar maple trees, and the Huron made an alcoholic corn gruel. The Kwakiutl drank a cocktail of elderberry juice, black chittens, and tobacco. And the Aleuts and Utes drank fermented raspberry juice. The Aztecs made pulque from agave. The plant's nectar was believed to be the blood of the goddess Mahahuel. The Mayans made a brew from honey and tree bark, and another recipe from fermented pineapple. Women of the Inca Empire chewed maize in their mouths to make chicha. Enzymes in the saliva helped break down the starch into sugar and alcohol. People in Brazil and Panama used the same technique with maize, cassava, and plantain. This chewing method was also used in Japan around 500 BCE to turn rice into sake. Sake was a government monopoly for centuries. It was used in court festivals and drinking games, but it became more important in religious ceremonies. By the 900s, Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines took over sake production. The ancient Babylonian Code of Hammurabi from 1750 BCE made it law that beer was the right of every citizen. Laborers were afforded half a gallon a day, while priests and administrators got a full gallon. There were numerous laws on the fair trade of beer and restricting the rights of women to drink and sell it. If a female tavern owner did not accept grain as payment for beer, she must be drowned. And if a priestess drank at a tavern, she must be burned to death.
The ancient Greeks were drinking wine by 2000 BCE. Those who didn't drink wine were considered barbarians. Cheers.
Hippocrates cited numerous medical uses for wine, and Plato praised the healthfulness of moderate drinking, but warned that no one under the age of 18 should be allowed to touch the stuff. A cult grew around the worship of Dionysus, the god of wine, theater, festivals, and pleasure. Adherents would gather to party, parade around giant phalluses, and of course consume copious quantities. One Dionysian, Olympia of Epirus, was the mother of Alexander the Great. The warrior emperor and his army considered heavy drinking to be a sign of strength. They conquered much of Eurasia while off their faces. The Roman equivalent of Dionysus was Bacchus. Roman women held parties to worship Bacchus or Bacchanalias 5 times a month. Men worried they were planning crimes during their girls' nights out, and in 186 BCE, the Senate banned them. As the Roman Empire expanded, vineyards were planted across the Mediterranean and Europe to ensure there was enough wine to keep the legions happy. This included Judea. The Hebrew Bible is full of references to wine, from Noah, who, after getting off the ark, planted a vineyard and got drunk, to Jesus, who miraculously transformed water into wine at a wedding. As the Romans expanded north into regions where grapes didn't thrive, they looked down on the inhabitants for drinking ale and mead. Their word for the brew was Brutus, from which the words brute and brutal derive. Germanic and Scandinavian people built large mead halls where they gathered to feast, enjoy music, and of course drink mead, which was made from honey. Early Viking kings lived in mead halls and plied their warriors with plenty of libations to ensure their loyalty. The epic poem of Beowulf, set in Denmark in the 500s, centers around a mead hall.
Lindsay, what are you drinking?
I'm having a cider, which actually has a very long history in Britain and Ireland. The Celts had been brewing it since about 3000 BCE. When the Romans invaded, they loved it so much they brought the recipe back to Rome, and many of their outposts throughout the Roman Empire started growing apples and making their own cider.
In the 600s, the Quran preached against alcohol for intoxication. Thus, it is prohibited in Islam and most Muslim countries.
Ale has been produced by Germanic and Celtic tribes since at least 3000 BCE.
To the base of fermented grain, they added a variety of fruits, honey, spices, and herbs, some of which were mildly narcotic, for flavor and balance. These are called grüt. The most popular beer additive today, hops, was first cultivated in Germany in the 700s. Charlemagne's father, Pippin the Short, had a hop garden.
Beer made with hops didn't make its way to England until the 1400s. It was viewed with suspicion and called a wicked weed, and even banned in some parts of the country. Henry VIII thought that hops ruined the wholesomeness of beer. He preferred the original recipe brewed with gruit, which was called ale, while that other hoppy stuff was called beer.
In the end, hops won out. They were cheaper than gruit and extended the shelf life of the drink. Today, nearly all beer and ale contains hops.
We have the idea that because sanitation was so bad in the Middle Ages, that people would die of dysentery if they so much as looked at a glass of water. So they only drank beer and wine and walked around blitzed all day. But that wasn't completely true. In the countryside, they did have fresh streams of water that they could drink safely. But if you lived in a big city like London, where the Thames was basically an open cesspool, you did have to drink beer. The brewing process sanitized the water, making it safe to drink. However, they weren't just walking around drunk all day. They drank small ale, which is actually only around 1% alcohol. The beer we drink today is about 4%.
In Britain, there were 3 places you could go out and get a drink. Taverns have been around since the Roman era. They were usually supplied by large-scale brewing operations at monasteries and universities. Some taverns had rooms upstairs to rent to weary travelers and pilgrims. They were called inns.
But taverns and inns were only found in large cities and near big roads. People in small villages needed a place to have a pint too.
Most beer was brewed at home, and like so many other household tasks, it generally fell to women. Some had a better talent for brewing than others. So beer became one of the earliest ways for women to run their own businesses. When a new cask was ready to sell, the brewer would put an ale stake, usually the stick she used to stir the brew, decorated with vines and flowers, outside her home. Then locals would know to stop by for a delicious drink and to socialize with their neighbors. Thus, the alehouse was born. In the UK today, taverns, inns, and alehouses are all collectively known as pubs, short for public house. The ale stake, one of the earliest forms of advertisement, evolved into the pub sign. Most people were illiterate, so the signs displayed colorful pictures to help patrons identify their favorite establishment. Local agriculture, religious, and royal themes were popular. In 1393, Richard II made it law that all alehouses must hang a sign. This helped royal inspectors ensure that ale was of reasonable quality. William Shakespeare's father, John, was one such inspector. Wine was consumed by the rich and poor alike in France, Spain, and Italy, where grapes thrived. But it had to be imported to England and was only afforded by the wealthy. King Henry VIII kept his cellars at Hampton Court Palace stocked with plenty of imported wine. The king and courtiers guzzled about 75,000 gallons each year. At feasts, wine was mixed with other luxury flavors, like imported spices, plums, and orange peel.
And on really special occasions, like weddings and coronations, they filled fountains like this with wine.
Would you like to have a drink with me while we talk about our favorite topics in history? Then join me on my historic group tour to Scotland from May 15th to 21st, 2024. Over 7 days, we'll experience the highlights of Scottish history, from lowlands to highlands. We'll see the honours of Scotland at Edinburgh Castle, Bronze Age burial chambers at Balnurin of Clava, Eilean Castle, the Living History Highlands Folk Museum, Dunkeld Cathedral, the mystical Isle of Skye, and so much more. We'll try delicious Scotch delicacies and unwind over a whiskey tasting. And most amazingly, we'll do it all with a group of fellow history lovers and a local guide. Click on the link in the description to reserve your place on this historic trip today. I can't wait to meet you in Scotland. In the 1600s, winemakers in the Champagne region of France wanted to make a drink to rival the deep reds of their southern neighbors in Burgundy. But their colder climate meant grapes couldn't fully ripen and produced a thinner, lighter, more acidic wine. A few innovative monks added yeast and rock sugar to the bottled wine and allowed it to ferment for a further 2 years. The finished product was a carbonated libation. French kings have been crowned in Rheims Cathedral in Champagne since 816, and they often enjoyed local libations during their coronation banquets. When the new sparkling wine was presented to Louis XIV, it caught on and soon became popular across Europe. Both Catholic and Protestant leaders preached that alcohol was a gift from God, if consumed in moderation, but drunkenness was a sin. In the 1640s, Parliament funded their civil war against King Charles I with an ale tax. But when Puritan General Oliver Cromwell beheaded the king and took over the country, he outlawed drinking and closed all the pubs. This was an unpopular move, to say the least, and contributed to the fall of the Republic and the restoration of the monarchy. King Charles II reopened the pubs. Taxes on ale continued to fund the British Navy as they colonized much of the world. Sailors were given a ration of 1 gallon of beer a day. The Mayflower carried more beer than water. Early American colonists made bitter beer from spruce twigs while they waited for hop seeds to arrive from Europe. Colonial beer was marked X, XX, or XXX according to its alcoholic content.
Personally, I prefer beer, cider, and wine, drinks which have been around for thousands of years.
I love a good martini or gin and tonic.
And hard liquor is just about to join the party.
Distillation was probably invented in India in the 1st century CE. In this process, a fermented beverage is evaporated, removing much of the water. The concentrated condensation is collected, and the resulting liquor has a much higher alcoholic content. Sura, a distilled liquor made from sugarcane and spices, has been enjoyed and used as medicine in India for at least 2,000 years. It is the favorite beverage of Indira, king of the Hindu gods. Early medical texts, the Ayurveda, includes recipes for sura and directions for its use in sedating patients during surgery and easing the pain of laboring mothers. The distillation process spread slowly to the Middle East and Italy, where the medical school of Salerno was making liquors in the 1100s. The Latin term aqua vitae, or water of life, was translated into numerous languages to describe the local spirits. In France, it became eau de vie, a distilled wine. In Scandinavia, it was aquavit, and in Russia, vodka, both made from grains or potatoes. And the Old Irish translation, wuse bitha, later became whiskey. This grain spirit was first recorded as being distilled in Ireland in 1405 and in Scotland in 1494. From the 1650s, rum was an integral part of the triangular slave trade. Humans were captured in West Africa and shipped to the Caribbean islands and American colonies. There they would be forced to grow sugarcane and other crops. Raw cane or molasses was often shipped to New England, where the sugar was distilled into rum. Distilling became the largest industry. Then the rum was shipped to Europe, where some would be consumed and some taken to Africa to purchase more enslaved people. Colonists introduced distilled liquor to Native Americans. Their intoxicants had been limited to ritual use, and they had little tolerance and no social structure for personal use. Colonists encouraged tribal leaders to drink during meetings so that they would have an advantage when negotiating for land. As more liquor was offered and traded, alcohol dependence grew prevalent. Liquor was one of the many tools used to erode Native American civilization and push them off their land. British sailors were given rum rations. Navy strength still describes spirits above 57% alcohol. Some captains watered down rum to keep their crews under control. This mix was called grog. Rum was also the preferred libation of pirates, who preyed on naval and merchant ships. In 1805, British Admiral Horatio Nelson died defeating Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar. According to legend, the hero's body was placed in a cask of rum to preserve it for the trip home. When the HMS Victory arrived and the barrel was opened, Nelson's pickled body was there, but the rum was gone. The crew had enjoyed one last drink with the Admiral. Sailors still refer to rum as Nelson's blood. In the mid-1700s, distillation was introduced to Mexico. Pulque, made from agave for 4,000 years, was distilled into tequila. In the 13 American colonies, cider was the most common libation. In 1767, the average New Englander drank 35 gallons per year. Settlers on the Ohio frontier were required to plant 50 apple trees to guarantee a land title and enough cider. Rum was also widely available and was enjoyed in drinks like flip, a mix of rum, beer, and sugar, heated by plunging a red-hot fireplace poker into the mug.
Back in England in the 1700s, cheap liquor was flavored with juniper berries, which was called Ginevra in French, but the English shortened it to gin. Parliament encouraged turning excess grain into gin. They were at war with France yet again and had put an embargo on imported brandy. But domestically made gin could be taxed to fund the war effort and colonial expansion.
The market was flooded with cheap gin, and London's poor took to drinking it to escape the harsh realities of life. The government did an about-face, criticizing commoners and vilifying women as terrible mothers in the so-called gin epidemic.
In 1737, legislation increased tax and gin consumption declined.
In the early 1800s, the U.S. western frontier had an abundance of corn, which was distilled into cheap whiskey and consumed in large quantities at saloons. In early taverns, there was only one brew on offer, and publicans would walk around refilling patrons' flagons with a pitcher. But as more options became available, the bar, a long, tall table at which customers gave their orders to a bartender, emerged. In the U.S., pubs came to be known as bars. German immigrants popularized beer, and farmers abandoned their cider orchards. By the turn of the century, Schlitz and Anheuser-Busch were brewing on an industrial scale. The recipes they brought from Germany were not for ale, but for lager, which is brewed cold with yeast at the bottom, creating a lighter, clear and crisp drink with a longer shelf life. Around the same time, the British had colonized India. They tried to ship familiar ale to British soldiers there, but it kept going rancid in transit.
So an extra hoppy brew with a longer shelf life was developed. This is called India Pale Ale, or IPA. Yuck.
India had been making distilled liquors for nearly 2,000 years. While Westerners were drinking the hard stuff straight, Indians made it more palatable with punch. They mixed liquor with water, sugar, and fruit juice and served it in a communal bowl. The English did have a similar tradition with wassail, spiced ale or cider, which had been paraded around at Christmas time since the Middle Ages.
British soldiers brought the tradition of punch back from India, and it became popular at secret drinking societies, often connected to universities, which brings back a lot of memories for me. In the United States, this translated to the cocktail.
An individual drink of liquor mixed with juice, tonic, flavored syrups, and/or bitters, of which there are endless iterations. With the expanding availability of refrigeration, crisp and creative mixed concoctions became a craze in the late early 1900s. In 1917, Mrs. Clara Walsh of St. Louis threw the first cocktail party at her home for 50 guests. It was a hit and covered in the local news. Absinthe, made from hallucinogenic wormwood, gained popularity in France in the late 1800s. It was associated with Bohemian culture and inspired artists and writers including Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, Ernest Hemingway, and Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. But chasing the green fairy gained a bad reputation, and it was banned in 1915. Absinthe has since been proven no more dangerous than other alcohols, and it is once again available. During the Industrial Revolution, factory owners needed reliable, sober workers, and cultural attitudes towards drinking changed. Tea and coffee consumption increased, and self-discipline was praised. But workers still craved an escape from the grind, so a week's worth of drinking was often concentrated on Sundays, their only day off. That meant workers often returned on Monday morning, still drunk or hungover. In northern Britain, factory owners began allowing their employees to leave at 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoons, to allow them to start drinking then and hopefully return on Monday sober and refreshed. The term weekend was first coined in 1879. By 1927, Henry Ford shut down his car factories for all of Saturday and Sunday, and in 1938, the 40-hour work week was codified into U.S. law.
So you can thank hangovers for the weekend.
In the early 1900s, the temperance movement gained traction in the U.S. Its proponents had real concerns about the effects of alcohol on crime, public health, and family life. The movement was spearheaded by women. They and their children suffered the most from alcohol abuse among men, and women were expected to be society's moral compass. The temperance and suffrage movements became linked. In 1920, both causes were victorious. The 19th Amendment gave U.S. women the right to vote, and the 18th, or Volstead Act, banned alcohol across the country. Prohibition did cut down alcohol consumption by 30 to 50%, but it also pushed drinking underground and made it more dangerous. Rum runners and bootleggers imported liquor illegally from Canada and the Caribbean. The term bootlegger comes from hiding a flask in one's boot. Beer and wine had too much volume, so only hard liquor was worth smuggling. Liquor was also brewed and distilled illegally in the U.S., and because there was no government regulation, it could be deadly to drink. It was served up in speakeasies, secret, sometimes literally underground, bars where you had to speak easy or whisper a password to get in. And all this illegal activity was run by mafia syndicates, who were gaining power and growing violent. Russia, Finland, Iceland, and Norway also tried outlawing alcohol during this time. But prohibition did not fix the problems it aimed to, and caused new ones, so it was repealed in 1933. Many of America's talented bartenders had immigrated to Europe, where the party continued. They brought their cocktail recipes with them and invented new ones with continental twists. The December 1934 issue of Esquire magazine listed the most popular cocktails of the time: old-fashioned, dry martini, champagne cocktail, planter's punch, and daiquiri. After World War II, American soldiers brought home taste for the drinks they tried in the South Pacific, and tiki culture brought Mai Tais stateside. The classic cocktail had a comeback in the 1950s and early 60s with the martini business lunch. In the 1960s, the jet age made international travel chic and multicultural food and drink popular for those who couldn't hop on a Pan Am flight. Pina coladas, Moscow mules, and imported wines and liqueurs were guzzled. Cocktail culture somewhat subsided in the 60s and 70s with the emergence of drug culture. But it fizzed back in the 80s with tequila sunrises and Harvey Wallbangers. Attitudes towards alcohol dependence began to shift. Addiction is seen increasingly as a medical condition rather than a personal or moral failing. The 2000s saw a revival of mixology, and many classic cocktail recipes were rediscovered. Today, there is an emphasis on locally sourced craft breweries and distilleries, with a demand for variety reflecting modern global tastes. And the last decade has seen the increased prominence of the mocktail for those who enjoy the community aspect of drinking culture, but not the inebriating effects.
Wherever you are and whatever you like to drink, we raise a glass to you. Cheers!
Thank you for watching.
Perfect.
Too much?
That was great. Have a drink and then you feel
I
better.
like gin. Give me that bottle and a straw.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Just, yeah, we'll just put them right there. Beautiful.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.